Usually when we talk about building infrastructure, um, things like roads or bridges or even those massive coastal seawalls, the financial math is pretty straightforward, and honestly, it's a little depressing.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
You pour millions of dollars into tons of concrete, the mayor cuts a ribbon, and literally the very next day, that asset just starts depreciating.
exactly. I mean, the elements immediately start wearing it down.
It becomes this slow, incredibly expensive march toward eventual replacement.
But then you look at natural ecosystems, right?
Mhm.
Mangroves, seagrass meadows, coral reefs. Under the right conditions, a living ecosystem doesn't just degrade over time, it actually grows.
It adapts.
Yeah, it adapts to the changing environment. It actually appreciates in value and protective power.
Which I think highlights a massive global paradox. I mean, we eagerly fund the static concrete seawall that we know is going to fall apart, but we leave the living, appreciating ecosystem completely off the balance sheet. So our entire model for coastal protection is just financed backward.
And that backward math is exactly what we are tackling today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission for you today is to unpack a really fascinating practitioner analysis. This is from July 2026 on the Climate-Nature Nexus. We are going to explore how nature-based solutions are revealing some major secrets about financing global resilience. It completely changes how you look at the shoreline.
It does. And it is important to state right up front that there isn't, some ideological argument about hugging trees or blindly prioritizing green spaces over gray concrete.
Right.
This is a hard-nosed financial and engineering analysis. We are really talking about treating coastal ecosystems as highly productive resilience infrastructure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because treating a swamp or a reef like a piece of civic infrastructure, I mean, that flips everything we know on its head. When a city builds a seawall, we know exactly who owns it, what the engineering standard is, and, when the maintenance schedule happens. You can't exactly hand a maintenance schedule to a coral reef.
No, you can't. Ecosystems cross property boundaries wildly. They produce public benefits and private benefits at the exact same time. And crucially, they are vulnerable. I mean, they can appreciate, yes, but they can also lose function.
Like what? What makes them lose function?
Well, a big concept here is coastal squeeze. So when sea levels rise, a natural beach or marsh would normally just migrate inland. But if we've built a hard concrete wall right behind it, that ecosystem is squeezed between the rising water and the wall until it literally drowns.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Add in pollution and climate change, and these assets are under severe threat. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is already warning about the widespread decline of coral reefs, even under low emissions scenarios. So the response isn't to just pretend nature behaves exactly like concrete.
It's about building new systems, right?
Exactly. The
Yeah.
response is to build the accounting and contracting architecture that is actually appropriate for a living asset.
So to understand how we do that, we actually have to start at the biological level.
Hmm.
The source material has this wonderful story that illustrates the trap we often fall into. Back in 2024, off the coast of Krabi in southern Cambodia, something amazing happened. A dugong, which is basically a manatee's cousin, this beautiful marine mammal, was spotted again after being completely absent for a decade.
Right, the dugong.
Yeah. Now, I read that, and my immediate reaction is, awesome, the dugong is back, our conservation worked, the ecosystem is healed, pop the champagne. But why isn't that enough to prove our coastal protection is back online?
What's fascinating here is what that dugong actually represents versus what it doesn't. I mean, it is a brilliant biological signal. Dugongs depend entirely on functioning seagrass habitats. So if the dugong is swimming around, we know the seagrass is recovering.
Which is good.
It's great. But a dugong is an invitation to investigate, not a substitute for evidence. If you are going to finance a coastline the exact same way a city finances a utility plant, you need rigorous standards of evidence. You cannot take a biological indicator and magically extrapolate that carbon storage, fisheries, and coastal wave protection have all returned to 100% capacity.
Right. I think I'm wrapping my head around this. It's a lot like doing a major home renovation. Just because you finally installed a beautiful new front window, the dugong, in this case doesn't mean your cracked foundation is suddenly fixed. You still have to inspect the actual foundation.
That is the perfect way to look at it. Each one of those services requires its own baseline. You have to measure a specific service at a specific site and link it to a specific beneficiary. You can't just slap a global value estimate on a local patch of seagrass just because a dugong swam by.
Okay, so we are moving from biological indicators to actual engineering now. Because if a biological win isn't immediate proof of protection, how do we physically measure and build out these natural defenses in the real world. The text makes a really strong point that coastal protection is not just a binary choice between a giant concrete wall and completely untouched wild nature.
It's a gradient. You go from fully engineered on one end all the way to fully ecological on the other. And where a community falls on that gradient has to be driven by the actual hazard they face, the local geography, the space available, and, the time horizon.
It can't just be vibes.
Exactly. It cannot be driven by an ideological preference for quote-unquote green solutions.
There's a project mentioned in the text that perfectly illustrates this, the Building with Nature project in Demak, Central Java.
Health
This is in Indonesia. They didn't just walk out to the beach, plant a bunch of mangrove seeds, and, hope for the best.
No, they didn't.
They actually went in and engineered the coastline first. They built these highly permeable structures out of brushwood and bamboo.
Right, and those bamboo structures were specifically designed to reduce incoming wave energy and capture sediment.
So they calmed the water down.
Precisely. By doing that, they engineered the calm, stable water conditions that mangroves actually need to recolonize naturally.
I'm putting myself in the shoes of a local decision maker here, though. If I'm a coastal mayor and I know a severe storm season is coming next year, I don't have 10 years to sit around waiting for a mangrove forest to grow from scratch.
Of course not.
That delayed ecological establishment just seems like a massive, unacceptable interim risk for a town.
And your concern is completely valid. It's exactly why an automatic preference for green over gray is dangerous in practice. When communities face immediate life-threatening exposure, a measure that takes years to mature has a very low present value. It poses an unacceptable risk.
So you need a stopgap.
That is where hybrid design comes in. Those bamboo structures in Demak, they were enabling works. They basically functioned as a temporary scaffold.
I like that word, scaffold.
Yeah, in some locations, the engineered structure serves as that scaffold while nature establishes itself over a decade. But in other locations, the engineered structure must remain the permanent defense because the ecosystem alone simply cannot meet the required service standard for the town. The seawall is not the enemy.
Okay, so we know how to integrate nature physically, and we know we sometimes need that hybrid scaffolding. But when the natural defense actually is established and working, just how powerful is it? Because to treat this like infrastructure, we really have to quantify its protective power without exaggerating it.
The numbers are staggering, but they do require immense discipline to use correctly. Let's look at mangroves globally. Rigorous research estimates that mangroves avert more than $65 billion in expected property damage annually, mostly from tropical cyclones.
Wow.
And they protect more than 15 million people.
$65 billion in averted damage every single year.
And coral reefs, they do more than $4 billion in expected storm damage each year.
Just by being there.
Basically, yeah, they act as submerged breakwaters, physically shattering the energy of incoming waves before they ever even hit the shore.
The source also cites a very specific, tragic, but revealing historical event to ground these numbers. The 1999 Odisha supercyclone in India. Researchers analyzed over 400 villages in the aftermath, and they found that villages protected by wider mangrove belts had significantly fewer deaths.
Right.
The trees physically buffered the storm surge. But there is a huge caveat in this analysis, right? It showed that the government's early warning system actually saved more lives than the mangroves did.
Which is a crucial distinction to make. We also see this reality with tsunamis. After the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, there was clear evidence of vegetation providing protection in some settings. But you absolutely cannot assume that vegetation will protect a coastline from maximum intensity tsunami.
It makes me think of a natural ecosystem as a car's safety features. I mean, mangroves are like airbags, not a magical force field. They can dampen the impact of a crash. They can absolutely save your life, but they won't save you if you drive off a cliff.
Right, you still need other things.
You still need seatbelts, you still need brakes. And in the context of a coastline, the brakes are early warning systems, evacuation plans, and sometimes engineered sea gates.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights why we have to stop claiming that every single hectare of mangrove out there produces the global average in avoided loss.
Because it depends on where it is.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
cannot take that $65 billion global number, point to a single planted hectare and say, well, I saved X million dollars. You have to construct what is called a localized damage function.
Okay, let's break that down. A damage function. What does that actually mean for someone trying to fund a project on the ground?
It means mapping the specific relationship between the condition of your ecosystem, the intensity of the incoming storm, the physical exposure of the community, and the expected financial loss.
Right.
So if a pristine mangrove forest is sitting in front of a completely uninhabited coastline, its financial damage function is close to zero because there's literally no human property to protect.
Well, that makes sense.
The ecological value is high, sure, but the financial protection value is low. You have to calibrate the claim to the specific hazard and the specific site.
So we've proven the physical value. Mangroves and reefs save tens of billions of dollars a year in property damage when positioned correctly. But that creates a massive contradiction. If they are so incredibly valuable, why aren't Wall Street investors throwing money at them?
Right.
Why is there a funding shortage? I feel like we need to look at the massive gap between statistical economic value and actual bankable cash flow.
To understand that gap, we first have to unpack the four distinct outcomes that a single coastal ecosystem can deliver. It's an incredibly hardworking asset.
Okay.
First, you have adaptation. This is the physical protection we've been talking about, reducing wave energy and flooding. This is increasingly being recognized by governments in their climate pledges, like Cambodia prioritizing mangrove restoration in its national targets.
Okay, and outcome two is mitigation, the carbon storage. The source notes that restoring these ecosystems could potentially remove hundreds of millions of metric tons of carbon per year by 2030. They use the term blue carbon for this.
Yes, blue carbon.
Just to be clear for you listening, blue carbon ecosystems are coastal marine systems, like mangroves and tidal marshes, that pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and trap it deep in their underwater sediment. But the text makes a massive distinction between protecting existing blue carbon and restoring it.
That's a huge point. Restoration is about putting carbon back, but it's highly complex, and it can fail if the hydrology or sediment supply is wrong. Protection, on the other hand, is about consuming intact systems to avoid releasing the massive, centuries-old carbon stores they already hold in their soil.
Got it. Okay, outcome three is biodiversity. Global economic forums consistently rank biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse as the #2 global risk of the next decade, right behind extreme weather.
It's a massive threat. And finally, outcome four, livelihoods. This is the socioeconomic engine. In the Gulf of California, one study estimated a median annual fishery value of about $37,500 for every single hectare of mangrove fringe.
$37,000 a year per hectare.
Exactly. Globally, 500 million people depend on small-scale fisheries. When local communities rely on a mangrove for their daily income and food security, that is actually the greatest guarantee that the ecosystem will remain intact.
So what does this all mean? We have these four incredible outcomes: adaptation, mitigation, biodiversity, and livelihoods. And the accounting world is finally waking up to this. For the first time, global accounting boards at the UN are actually writing the rules to put tangible natural resources on the official public ledger.
Right, the new UN standards.
Yeah, they are treating nature like an asset. So reading this, it feels like this is the moment the floodgates open. We finally have the official math. So shouldn't the funding problem be solved?
You would naturally think so, but no. And this might be the most vital practitioner insight in the entire analysis. Booking an asset on a statistical ledger does not create a pair.
Wait, booking an asset on a ledger does not create a payer, meaning just because we count it doesn't mean someone is actually cutting a check.
Precisely. A government can mathematically quantify that a local mangrove provides $1 billion in storm protection. But unless there is a budget appropriation, a tax levy, a tariff, or a binding contract tied to it, that $1 billion is just a neat statistic on a piece of paper.
It's imaginary money.
Basically, it doesn't fund a single shovel of restoration work. An economic value stack, adding up the carbon, the fisheries, the wave protection, is not a contracted financing stack.
So to bridge the gap from accounting to actual financing, we have to find someone willing to write that check. We have to follow the money. Let's look at real-world mechanisms where natural value is successfully or unsuccessfully converted into cold, hard cash. The source gives us a brilliant success story out of Mexico.
Yes, the Mesoamerican Reef in Quintana Roo, Mexico. This is a landmark case for nature finance, a coastal management trust, which was funded by both public and private beneficiaries, like the local hotels.
Because they need the beaches to stay nice.
Exactly. They went out and bought a parametric insurance policy on the coral reef.
And just to clarify for everyone, parametric insurance is very different from the insurance you have on your car or your house. It doesn't wait for a claims adjuster to slowly walk around with a clipboard and assess the damage weeks later.
Right, that takes too long.
Yeah, it pays out automatically the second a specific metric is hit, like wind speeds topping 100 miles per hour in a specific grid.
And that speed is everything. In 2020, Hurricane Delta hit the coast. The wind speeds reached the trigger point in the insurance policy, and the policy automatically paid out $850,000 within days.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They didn't insure the reef so some hotel owner could get rich off the avoided damage payout. They insured it to pay for rapid emergency response.
Exactly. The payout funded trained teams to go out into the water immediately after the storm and physically repair the damaged reef. They stabilized broken corals and reattached them before they could die. It's an incredible mechanism for resilience.
It's literally like paying for paramedics for the reef. That is amazing. But the paper also gives us a reality check on insurance with a project called Risco. Risco initially tried to get insurance companies to pay annual fees for the risk reduction that mangroves provided.
Which makes sense in theory.
Right. They basically went to insurers and said, hey, this mangrove saves you money on property claims, so you should pay us a fee to keep the mangrove healthy.
And it failed. The insurers didn't buy in. They couldn't justify paying an ongoing annual fee for a theoretical avoided loss without demonstrated, airtight, continuous results. So Risco had to pivot entirely. They shifted to selling parametric coverage themselves and acting as a fund to invest in mangrove-positive businesses.
Which is a huge pivot. But this raises an important question in my mind. If the parametric insurance payout goes toward fixing the reef after a storm, who is actually paying the monthly premium to keep that policy active in the first place?
This raises an important question indeed. That is the million-dollar question in conservation finance. You still need a willing, everyday beneficiary. Insurers are great. They provide catastrophe modeling, they provide deep data sets, and they provide that quick liquidity when a disaster strikes.
But they aren't charities.
No, they aren't. An insurance company is not going to be your anchor revenue stream. They aren't going to pay you just to maintain a mangrove. You still need the local hotel or the port authority or the local government to recognize the value and write the check for the premium.
We also see public finance stepping in, where private markets haven't quite figured it out yet. The Asian Development Bank put together a $93 million financing package for a coastal project in Cambodia. And what is really telling is the sequence of how they spent the money. They funded ecological recovery, like marine conservation, and restoring seagrass habitats before they built the physical post-harvest infrastructure for the fisheries.
The logic there is impeccable, and it avoids a massive trap. If you build millions of dollars of fish landing sites and modern processing plants, but the local fishery is depleted and the coastal habitat is dead, you've just built a stranded asset.
Right.
You have a brand new facility with absolutely no fish to process. So resource recovery has to be treated as a productive, required precondition for the physical infrastructure.
So we've seen a few successes, but the overall need is just massive. The UN Adaptation Gap Report estimates that developing countries will need between $310 and $365 billion annually by 2035 just to adapt to climate change.
That's a huge number. And to put that in perspective, how much international public finance actually went to adaptation in 2023? Just $26 billion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the gap is enormous, but simply throwing more money at the problem won't solve it if we don't have the transaction infrastructure to deploy it effectively.
So for you listening right now, if you want to see these kinds of resilient nature-based projects happen in your own region, how do practitioners actually get this done? The paper lays out a few practical pathways to bridge this massive funding gap. You have public procurement, where governments literally buy resilient services from nature the exact same way they procure a new highway.
Yes.
You also have beneficiary trusts, like those hotels in Mexico pooling their money to protect the reef they all rely on.
Another crucial approach is aggregated portfolios. This means taking a dozen small, localized mangrove restoration projects and bundling them together. Individually, they are too small for a major institutional investor to look at, but bundled, they represent a significant investable asset.
And the paper heavily emphasizes a pathway focused on tenure and livelihoods, prioritizing the legal rights of local communities and indigenous peoples to avoid the ecosystem being converted or destroyed in the first place.
That legal foundation is non-negotiable. And finally, there is life cycle hybrid contracting. This is where a municipality contracts the construction of a concrete seawall and the restoration of a mangrove forest together as one sequenced, integrated service system rather than two competing projects.
But regardless of which pathway a project takes, there's a golden rule in this paper, a sequence you absolutely cannot skip. First, you measure the surface. Then you identify the exact beneficiaries. Then you establish who the payer is. Then you allocate the risk. And only then do you design the capital stack to finance it.
Exactly.
It's exactly like trying to launch a tech startup. You don't walk into a bank, ask for a massive loan, and say, I'll figure out what my product is and who my customers are later. But for years, we've been doing exactly that with nature. We've been saying, look, it's green, it's good, give us a loan.
And that's why the paper stresses that you can't just slap a trendy green bond label on a mangrove forest and call it a day. You need the legal and social architecture to steward the asset. That means ensuring free, prior, and informed consent when indigenous peoples are affected.
Right.
It means securing lawful land tenure so the people protecting the forest aren't suddenly evicted. Social rights and benefit distribution aren't just, nice to have progressive add-ons. They are the structural rebar that determines whether the biological asset survives and performs its protective function.
Synthesizing everything we've unpacked today. Nature is not a maintenance-free bomb that you can just plant and walk away from. And gray infrastructure, the concrete seawall, is not the enemy. The ultimate goal is a single life cycle resilient system that combines the ecological, the engineered, the fiscal, and the social.
And that means financing each component according to the actual measurable service it provides to the community.
So to you, our listener, here is your homework. The next time you walk or drive through your own town, take a hard look at the infrastructure around you. Next time you see a concrete seawall, a local marsh, or even just a municipal park, I want you to ask yourself, who actually benefits from this? And who is paying to steward it?
Because once you start asking those questions, you realize how invisible the economics of nature have been for our entire lives.
And it leaves me with one final provocative thought that builds on everything we've discussed today. If we are truly shifting to a world where we view living ecosystems as quantifiable, highly productive civic infrastructure, should the destruction of a coastal marsh by a private developer be legally and financially prosecuted exactly the same way as if they had taken a wrecking ball to a public bridge or a municipal water plant?
That is the natural conclusion to treating nature as an asset.
If nature is infrastructure, maybe it's time we start enforcing its protection like it is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We appreciate you taking the time to learn, to be curious, and to challenge how you see the world. Until next time.